My friends, fall and winter are right around the corner. Already the leaves are changing colors, they're hitting the ground, and before we know it, snow will be flying in the air. With those conditions, having the right tent is essential. A popular option with those conditions are hot tents. With that being said, today I have a hot tent to show you all. This one comes from OneTigris, and this is the Coco Nest tent. I cannot begin to count how many requests that I've received to check out this tent. It's a little bit early, but I figured we could go ahead, get it in, set it up, and check it out together. And everyone, that is what this episode is all about. By the way, my name is Luke. This is the Outdoor Gear Review. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Folks, let's do a component breakdown of this tent and let's see what's included before we set it up. With the Coco Nest tent, OneTigris has developed this to be a backpackable system. Yes, this is a 4th season tent. It is a hot tent. But as you can see here, the form factor is quite impressive. This measures only 21.7 inches long, and it's only 7.9 inches wide. For a 4th season tent, that's not bad. This will fit very easily inside of a typical backpack. As far as the features go, we have 2 compression straps, which are actually cords. Up here at the top, we actually have a roll top closure. Inside of this bundle here, we have all of the components. We do have 2 fabric compression straps. These are garbage. OneTigris, stop using these. Your customers will take these off and throw them away, or oftentimes leave them on the ground. As far as what is included with this tent, you receive the storage bag, you have the tent itself, we have 3 tent poles, and we have 6 guy lines and 12 tent stakes. When it comes to your tent poles, here's a trick on setting them up the easy way. Set them up vertically, not horizontally. This will make easy work out of your tent poles. When you have really long tent poles, setting them up vertically makes the entire process especially easy. Much easier than trying to set them up horizontally. So far, the setup process is very straightforward. You have sleeves with this tent. One side, those sleeves are sewn off, so the poles will end there. At the other end, you have cups. That's where you begin. In regards to the setup process, this is super simple, especially for a hot tent. On a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the most difficult, setting this up is a 3. There's not much to it. Again, it is super simple, everything makes sense, and you really can set this up on your own quickly. Again, folks, with the pole structure, we have sleeves, which are important. You have to consider that this is a 4th season tent. In other words, a tent that was designed for the cooler months, the colder months. These sleeves protect your poles so that ice doesn't develop on them, so that the sections do not get frozen together. Right here, we have the stove jack port. And as you can see, you can open this up and you can tie it off. With the stove jack port rolled back, you can see the stove jack itself. And yes, the stove jack is included with this tent. This doorway features quadruple zippers, meaning that you can open this up any way that you want to. You can also vent this if you want to. You can have a small gap or even a large gap to let in air. Here in the corner, we have a pocket so that you can store the door and get it out of the way. I have to admit, everyone, I'm very impressed with this tent so far. Impressive materials, impressive weight, impressive form factor. The overall features and the design is excellent. We have a very large door here. On the inside, this is a one-person tent. We have an inner, which is large enough for one person. With what I call the livable space, there's enough room here for a chair, a table, your stove, some firewood. With the inner, that's where you're going to sleep at. This features 2 zippers. I should mention that you can remove this if you want to use this without the inner. When it comes to this inner, it is shaped like a partial stop sign, partial octagon. That sort of shape greatly reduces the overall true size of this area because your body's not going to go into a corner or anything like that. You basically have to look at this as a rectangle. And because of that, folks, I mean, see, the thing is, let's say that you're 6 foot tall. And this right here is 6 foot. It works right next to the door. But think of your pad going this way. I mean, you go back just a little ways and this is 5 foot. Which means I'm not entirely sure how most people are going to fit inside of this. If you cram your feet against the wall and your head against the wall, this is 65 inches, which is 5 foot 5 inches. Allow me to demonstrate this in a different way. So, with me laying down, and I am a short guy, my feet are touching the wall, and my head is touching the wall right here. So again, if you're over 5'5", this is not going to work. Plain and simple, it's not going to work. Imagine being on your sleeping pad. It would be longer than this section here, and I'm just talking about a regular size sleeping pad. As I mentioned, I'm not the tallest guy in the entire world, but even I can't make this work. Not without some issues. How disappointing and also confusing. OneTigris, I do not understand what's going on here and what your thinking was with this shelter. How is this supposed to work? Anyways, when it comes to the inner, there are 2 mesh pockets on the inside. And I tell you what, let's just take a second here and let's go over some stats. Again, this is a 4th season tent, meaning that it was designed for cooler to cold conditions. This is a 1-person tent. You have 1 stove jack and also 1 vent. Concerning the materials, you're looking at a 40 denier sil nylon rainfly. It has a 75 denier polyester inner bottom, all of which feature a 3000 millimeter hydrostatic head rating, which is the waterproof rating. I mentioned before that the zippers are very, very smooth, and that's because they're YKK. The weight of this tent is 7.5 pounds, which is impressive, and the cost is $230. I just realized, everybody, I forgot to measure the height and the width of this. I was so distracted by how small this is, I forgot to finish up. The maximum height inside of this inner here is quite tall. We're looking at 50 inches, which is over 4 feet tall. As far as the width goes, at the widest point, it's roughly 36 inches, which is 3 feet wide. You do have to keep in mind, this wall slants in, this one too. When it comes to the livable space, let's go ahead and measure that too. At the widest point, it is 93 inches long. And then of course, it slopes down, and it's roughly 52 inches wide. The maximum height is roughly 54 inches. When it comes to this tent, the inner is just about unusable for most people. So if you're considering this shelter, this is how you will have to use it. You will need to take out that inner, put it away, discard it, whatever, and use this tent without a bug inner. Because the simple fact is, because of the overall design of the inner and the shape of this tent and the size, there's not enough space inside of that inner for most people. When you take that out, you will have plenty of space inside of this tent. I'm absolutely dumbfounded by the overall shape and the design of this inner, because it just simply makes no sense. I will reach out to OneTigris and ask them about this. There's something here I don't understand, and I want to understand it, so we will see how that goes. Future Luke here. I want to interrupt this video. It's been about a week and a half since I filmed the initial video with this tent. Since that point in time, I have contacted OneTigris and they have responded in regards to the size of the inner. And this is what they had to say. When we tested the inner before we made it, basically pre-production, colleagues at 6 foot, 5'10", and 5'7" tried it out. The colleague at 6 foot found it a bit cramped. You all have seen me measure the inside of this tent, and I have to say this leaves me somewhat confused because, well, we measured it, we hopped inside of it, it is super small. The only thing that comes to mind is that they were using a sleeping pad on the ground to stretch out the material as far as possible. This can't be done unless you put something down on the ground and physically force the material to spread apart. In that case, you could potentially increase the size of the inner. Well folks, instead of theorizing about this, let's put a sleeping pad on the inside of this tent. Let's see what happens. I was able to get the sleeping pad to fit on the inside of the tent, but it only fits one way. And it's really not that great of a solution. Basically, the pad is pushing one wall out and the other wall out. It only fits if you put this in at an angle. Your head will be up here and your feet will go into this corner. The problem is, you have to think about your sleeping bag, right? Your sleeping bag doesn't stop exactly where your feet are. It extends out. So your sleeping bag will be touching the wall. That will be causing condensation. Your sleeping bag is going to get wet. Then on the other side, you have your head. If you're short, under 5'5", you could possibly make this work. If you're taller than that, your head will be touching the material right at the edge of the sleeping pad. Something I just noticed is that the sleeping pad is not even laying completely flat on the ground, because one side is actually laying up against the wall instead of laying flat. Plain and simple, there's just not enough space for the sleeping pad. Now, you may be wondering about moving the pad closer to the door. This doesn't work either, because you would be coming into contact with the wall. You have to think about where your shoulder is going to be in relation to that sleeping pad and also the wall. And for most people, that's not going to work. With the sleeping pad on the inside of this tent here, my thoughts remain exactly the same. For the most part, this is not going to work for most people. So if you are considering this tent, the odds are you will have to remove the inner. If you're on the shorter side and you think you can make this work, do know this: rectangle-shaped sleeping pads will not fit. Extra long or extra wide pads will also not fit. Just your typical mummy-style sleeping pad, that's the only thing that's going to fit inside of this. And it's only going to barely fit. If you take out the inner, the overall size of this is quite impressive. And I'll tell you what, why don't we go ahead and let's take out that inner so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. With the inner removed, this makes so much more sense. This is so large, in fact, that it is actually echoing on the inside here. There is plenty of space with the inner gone that you can sleep this way or this way. The problem is that you no longer have bug protection. So you would have to be either okay with bugs or camping in very, very cold conditions. To wrap up this episode, let's go over my impressions of this shelter so far. As far as quality goes, this is a 10 out of 10. Every stitch is perfect, every seam, the seam tape. This is a very well-made tent. Obviously, getting inside of this tent is nice and easy. Getting out is very easy. Getting into the inner and out of the inner, that is easy too, and that's because both have very large doorways. Unfortunately, the odds are you are not going to fit inside of that inner. With this tent here, I would not even consider purchasing this to use the inner. That is something that needs to come out, again, for most people. Once you take it out, then you have enough space, but do consider the repercussions of that, such as having no bug protection inside of this tent. If you're okay without bug protection, or using the inner in other words, there's a ton of space here. There's enough space for a full-size cot, a stove, firewood, a chair, a table, and so on. In the future, I will use this tent in that way, but we will have to wait. It's not quite cold enough. The weight is not bad for a 4th season tent, a tent of this size. The storage size is very impressive. It will fit in your typical backpack. Yes, it's a little heavy, but you can easily backpack with this system. Later on in the fall, going into the winter, I will begin testing this out. Until then, you're not going to see much about this tent. This tent should not have the inner included, and they should drop the price. OneTigris can do the math to figure out what they need to subtract from this tent with the inner gone. Stop making it. I mean, plain and simple, it's too small for most people to sleep in. It doesn't make any sense. They could offer this as a floorless tent and lower the price. In that case, this tent makes a lot of sense. But if you're someone who needs bug protection, forget about this. This is not going to work. At least not with the way that this is set up. You might be able to take out the inner and put your own in. That's possible, maybe. I don't know. That would take some trial and error, some experimenting, but it's possible. If you enjoyed this episode, if you found it helpful, please hit the thumbs up. I do appreciate it. Until next time, everyone, take care, be well, strength and honor. Bye for now.